as of today, we've enriched and validated over 500,000 leads purely with automation, while keeping a tight budget. So we built automation once, and then all the leads were enriched and validated without any additional labor. And I can guarantee you this will be the most in-depth, nuts and bolts videos you've watched on this subject. Hey business owners, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Garik Tate, and I get B2B businesses and firms new clients with AI development and cold email outreach. I'll show you our philosophy and our strategy of how we enrich and validate leads, and I'll also show you how we actually built the automations ourselves with low-code tools that a non-developer can use to build something like this. If you're curious, yes, this spreadsheet will be available for download in the description below. We also plan to release the make.com scenarios as templates for you to download as well, and that should be in the pipeline shortly, but this already gives you something to be downloading and following along with if you want to follow along with this video, and hopefully give you a good starting place to be creating your own automations around this. This is something that you can try to emulate yourself, or you can go with a developer off of Upwork to build it for you faster, but I think it's going to be a real treat and probably be the best video you'll find on this subject. Let's dive in. So what's the problem we're trying to solve? First, we need to get the lead list. We have a video about how we get most of our leads from Apollo. You can check out that video here. But once we have the list of emails, it's time to validate them and enrich the ones that don't have leads. Typically, the lead list we get from Apollo have about 50% to give or take 10% emails. Not all of them are valid. So we had to validate the ones that we have emails for and then enrich the ones we don't have emails for with emails. Then we have to deal with all the catch-alls, and we have to do it cost effectively. Quick aside, what is a catch-all? A catch-all email is essentially an email address that you cannot validate if it actually is used by a person or not. The reason why that is that it's set up on their email server so that every time they receive an email from any email address that is not owned, it's sent to a centralized email like help@ or info@. Problem is, very often two things occur. Either A, it's an old server account that's not even up to date and therefore actually will not accept emails. Your emails will bounce. Or B, it will end up inside of a email account that no one actually reads. When was the last time you read your business's info@? So these email addresses are fundamentally harder to validate, but there are good tools on the market to do so. So let's talk about them. So to get started, we need to first understand the concept of waterfall enrichment. Waterfall enrichment is where you take your lead list through a series of steps, essentially trying to enrich your emails with multiple different tools. Now, the reality is most tools out there that enrich emails, such as Prospeo, Find Email, Hunter.io, and all the others, essentially what they're doing is they're just guessing the email address on the other side of the account. They're guessing the email address of the prospect's website by essentially pinging their server with multiple combinations. So let's say that my name is Garik Tate, and you're trying to find my email address on AICO.com. So what you'll try out is you'll start pinging the server with Tate, Garik T, maybe just Garik, and then you'll see which ping ends up giving you the response. The reality is that most of these services underneath the hood are very, very similar, but they do have slightly different algorithms and strategies, which makes it good to use something like waterfall enrichment, where you're attempting to use multiple tools after the other. Because if one fails, the slight tweak in the algorithm might allow the other tool to succeed. Now, of course, you can understand that if they're all just guessing and pinging the server, well, then you run into a problem with catch-all emails, because every time you ping that server, it's going to return as if it's a real email address. Now, the way a lot of these services have different competitive advantages is that many of them keep a record of validated known emails that belong to a certain website to get the naming schema. So for instance, if you know that my email account is gariktate@, you can probably guess that other people inside my same organization have the same naming schema, first name, last name, versus if I was G Tate, you would know how to guess the other email in my organization. So the different ones have different proprietary information. So that's another thing that can separate the different tools apart from each other. Now, waterfall enrichment is a great idea, but how you execute it in practice can get a little bit messy. And so I want to show you how we actually have built our own waterfall enrichment. I call it Spiderweb enrichment because that's a lot more accurate underneath the hood. So this is our Spiderweb enrichment waterfall diagram thing. Isn't it beautiful? So these are the services that we use. Reality is, underneath all of this, there's about 20 different tools that we are using to enrich things, but we've been able to simplify the Spiderweb to just a core 4 tools, because reality is the other 20 tools are just used underneath this. So I'm going to explain that in a second. Those 4 tools are these 4 nodes right here in the center. So let's talk about it one by one. So this is our start point right here. This is our lead source. Sometimes this is Google Maps scraping. Sometimes we scrape directly from LinkedIn. Very often we use Apollo. Whatever it is, this is our lead source. Hopefully with some email accounts, but very often not 100% of them will have email accounts. All of that is then sent to our verifier. So here I just call it cheap verifier. It depends which verifier you want to use here. We like to use million verifier here because we find it is cost effective. And because at this stage, we're not worried about catch-alls. They're all honestly interchangeable largely. I'm going to be talking about that in a second though. So whatever is your first verifier should be a cheap one. And for us, million verifier is cost effective. So at that point, million verifier can respond one of 3 ways. Either it's invalid, it's a catch-all, or it's valid. So those are 3 ways that million verifier can proceed. Let's take them one at a time. If it's valid, we then want to double validate it. Our guarantee to our clients is that every lead's email account is double verified before we shoot them an email. So for the second one, we actually use a more expensive validator. We like to use zero bounce here because zero bounce will not only report if it's a valid email account or not based on the server configuration from pinging their server. They also have a bit more of an extensive database of different email accounts. So they can mark if an account is associated with abusive activities, such as marking everything as spam or some other sort of activity that would lower your email account's deliverability. So even if it's a valid email, zero bounce still can protect you against emailing from certain emails that you just don't want to be mailing. One last note about the second validator we use, once again, zero bounce. When we use zero bounce, we also like it because it provides us the SMTP provider of the lead. That means basically we can tell if they're using something like Microsoft or G Suite for their email service provider. This is helpful for our own tracking internally of the performance of our campaigns. We can see if our campaigns are performing better when we're emailing to Google versus to Microsoft versus anything else. So that's just an added benefit, and is actually why we like to use this service even after it's validated by other validators. We still like to use it because it gives us the SMTP. If at that point, either one of these validators say that it's a catch-all email, they go to a validator called Scrubby. So Scrubby is a tool that we use to validate emails. We're going to be talking about alternatives near the end of this video, but Scrubby is what we've been using for a while. It was developed by Nick Abraham in association with another company called Vendasys. I'm going to be talking a little bit later about potential other recommendations, but the reason why we chose Scrubby in the beginning was because it promised to actually validate the emails by sending them an email themselves. So what that means is that they have their own sending infrastructure and will actually send them an email, wait 2 days, and see if they get a bounce reply back. Because if they get a bounce response, then they can know that it's not actually a valid email. Now, I'm not an expert in their system. I have no insider knowledge at all, but I will say that I'm a little concerned by that philosophy, even though it was enough to get us to use it. I'm a little concerned with the philosophy. Maybe in the future, I'll do a podcast with Nick Abraham and ask him this question myself. But just from the outside, I'd be a little bit worried if their entire sending infrastructure is mostly used to shoot emails to invalid email accounts, that their sending infrastructure would degrade to the point where they might get a lot of false positives with bounces. I'm not exactly sure. I'm saying this from an outside perspective that while I can recommend Scrubby, we have used them pretty much exclusively for this process. We're now looking at certain alternatives, but I can still definitely recommend that it is a good product, though we have had issues in the past with their servers being down. That's just been our experience, but overall it's been getting better. If at any point it is noted to be invalid, whether Scrubby or any of the validators say it invalidated, or even if it turns out that there is no email address found in the initial lead source, we will then send that lead to BCR to get their email account. So what is BCR? BCR is short for bettercontact.rocks, and they are the service that we use to use all 20 different services to get email accounts. So when I said before we use 100.io, Prospeo, etc., we primarily use BCR for that purpose. You can see here their website, and this shows off how their technology works depending on who you're contacting or wanting to enrich. They will use 20 different providers in a waterfall enrichment style to get you their email account. They also then validate it themselves, but even if they validate themselves, we will once again use our own more expensive validator to revalidate it. One last note about BCR. In full transparency, we are an affiliate of them, but we've been using them very happily since we started our agency. And like I said, I've been very happy with their service. Can wholeheartedly recommend them. Recently, they also improved how they charge to make their service more affordable. And it's actually made it where even after we started to expand our service significantly and started to have the development team to build all of this in-house, when we actually looked at the pricing, BCR still stayed cost competitive enough to continue to use, even though we actually are an in-house capable of replacing it. So I can definitely recommend BCR both for beginners and for advanced users. And the affiliate link we have is in the description below. Feel free to check them out. So in recap, every single lead, if we download, let's say 50,000 leads from Apollo, it would be an absolute nightmare to upload, download, import, export the lead list between all of these different providers. But by automating it, we're able to make sure that every single lead that we have goes through the entire process to become double validated, or if we don't have it, to use 20 different providers in order to find it. At the end of this process, we either always stop here if BCR can't find them and they're found to be invalid for any purpose, or it's successful and we then send it to Clay. We'll be having future videos about what we do in Clay and how we use AI in order to enrich the email account, but that's the long and the short. All right, from there, let's actually jump into how we built it ourselves with low-code, no-code platforms. Ta-da! This is a peek underneath the hood of how we set things up. So our tech stack started off in mostly based off of what you're seeing here, just straight up Google Sheets with array formulas, and also make.com. In this video, I'll just be doing a high-level overview of how our make.com scenarios work. Let us know in the comments below if you want a more in-depth version of this part of the process. But there's plenty of great make.com tutorials out there you can watch to see the exact steps of how to emulate our steps here. Instead, I'm going to be going on the high level of how we built our switchboard, which is really the master control that weaves together all the make.com scenarios, which ultimately allows us to build this spiderweb enrichment here. So what you see here are the columns that we most often extract from any source that we're extracting leads from. Here, I've just had this wonderful fellow with a great name as the example, and I just use it on repeat, but you can imagine here 50,000 plus leads, and the process works just as well for that. Note that with Google Sheets, there is a limit of 10 million cells, which means for us, we found that after about 80,000 or 100,000 leads going into this process, it would start slowing down. And so we end up making multiple of these switchboards. But if you get to that point, we can make a video about that later down the road about how this scales. So these first columns you see here are the ones that we found to be most important. The LinkedIn profile, the first name, their company name, last name, full name, location, their industry, their company's LinkedIn URL, the company's Facebook and Twitter, their website, their phone number, and their email. Once we have this information, which this information is provided by pretty much any source that you can use, and we don't need it all. The ones that for us that are most important are the website, the first name and last name, and the company name. If we have that, then we're good to go. I'd say secondarily most important is probably going to be the company's LinkedIn and the profile URL. Yeah, if we have that, we're kind of ready to rock and roll. Of course, the email is always nice, but once again, this process will handle even if we don't have the email address. So from there, if we scroll to the right here, these are just some checkers we use to check some various stuff, but it's not really important to the core thrust of it. We come to this table here, which is the conductor that conducts all the different make.com scenarios that enrich the email accounts. So here it is. This is how it goes. So the first block here is the block that contains all the logic that has to do with sending the leads to Million Verifier. So the way this works is it essentially just gets the email account from column M if we have the email account. And then this is where we will then send the information to Million Verifier. So the way this works is pretty simple. So let's say that none of these leads were validated, or let's say that this lead here was not validated. So at that point, the trigger column will be noted as true. So the logic here is all the logic that has to do with this. But it essentially says, if we have the email account and we have not yet validated, so column AL is blank, column AJ is not blank, and all that's true, and this same email account is not currently already sent to Clay because we record at the very end if we send leads to Clay already. We're basically checking here, have we already sent this lead to Clay? So then if there's repeats, we don't waste extra credits on it. If all those conditions turn out to be true, this then is what kicks off the make.com scenario. So the way that this works is it's primarily all found here. We will search all the rows where this is found to be true, and every row that it's found to be true, this will then fire, sending the leads to million Verifier to validate, converting all into a single file so we don't have to consume multiple operations, and then sending to the Google Sheet. Once that's done, it will then enter in valid or invalid or whatever it is. And then we can move on to the next block. So the next block is all about validating the email a second time, which, as you remember, we primarily use zero bounce as our second validator, and it works very similarly. The first column loads up the email account which we are attempting to validate. The second column is what notes if we want to proceed with triggering it or not. And then the other columns are used to record the results of that validation. Next one is the same, but for better contact rocks. And the last one is used for scrubby. So note here, if I zoom out a little bit, while this can go straight left to right, the reality is an email account could start off here, then bounce all the way here because it failed to validate. It could become invalid. And then from better contact rocks, it could then bounce note to be valid, go here. Then this place could say, no, it's a catch-all. And if it's a catch-all, it could go here. And then from here, it could then be sent to Clay because the very last one here is all about Clay. So there are multiple combinations, as many combinations as I was showing in the previous diagram, that can occur. To make it just a little bit easier to understand, or at the very least give examples of how it works, what you see here are 5 different examples of different scenarios that occurred. So this very first, the scenario that's being played out is that Garik@example.com was a valid email account. It then was sent here, at which point it was also validated. And because of that, it was double validated. It was automatically queued up and was ready to send to Clay. The second scenario is that it was noted as valid, but then it was noted as invalid, which is very often the case. Sometimes the second validator, which is why we double validate in the first place, it notes it to be invalid. If that's the case, then we're sent over to Clay, and Clay then described Garik 2 example would be deliverable. So now that's been sent back and is now ready to process. So the logic here in this one actually is important to note. It can run multiple times, and it only knows not to proceed if column AO is not equal to column AM, which basically is another way of saying that the previous account that was validated is not the same as a current account ready to be validated. So in this case, it's now ready to be validated. So let me just show actually what this looks like, because we have here an example of something that is ready to be triggered to proceed. If I jump over to the zero bounce module, let me set this up so it'll run off that example sheet. All right, I've just now had to simplify the process a little bit because it has some extra modules that only make sense if it's plugged into our larger infrastructure. So in the future, we do plan to be releasing templates for all of these make.com scenarios in the simplified format. But with that being said, let's jump in and run this. So you can see here that this is noted to be ran because the trigger module for the second validator is noted to proceed. And if we run this, it's ran, send it to zero bounce, and now it's updated it. And so here, Garik 2 example is noted as a do not email, and it has been double validated. So that's just how every one of these runs. When the trigger column, whether it's for the first validator, the second validator, the third validator, when something appears there, it will signify that make.com scenario to run and then send that email to the validator. And so then the last section is a section that sends leads over into Clay. And so the way this works is that, once the emails are double validated or whatever, the emails are queued up here, and then this displays the webhook that we use to send the leads into Clay. Right here, it just says link 1 because I'm not revealing our webhook URLs, but this is where that would be. And if you want to learn more information about Clay and how we use it, you can click up here for a video that we do walking through our Clay templates, and stay subscribed because we plan to be releasing a lot more content about how we use Clay to enrich leads and also to write copy for those leads with AI. And if you find that video helpful, there's a link in the description of that video for access to the Clay template, so that you can hit the ground running. So the way that we do that is that when the final email is validated, it is sent into this column and is then signified to be triggered to send to a Clay webhook. So this column right here is often the webhook of the table, but even if you are not using that functionality, the rest of this table will still absolutely work because you'll just stop at column AZ and then upload column AZ into Smart Lead or whatever service that you're planning to use. Final notes, how would we improve this architecture in the future? So these are actually some things that we plan to do internally, or at least that we've been debating for a while. First of all, we are considering to switch the whole thing to BigQuery as our master database. So BigQuery will scale beyond 10 million cells. And so as we are getting more and more clients, we're starting to hit the walls of Google Sheets, but have been able to handle it reasonably well by having multiple switchboards. But in the future, we probably will congeal all this down into a BigQuery database. Second is that Lead Magic is cheaper than Million Verifier. We like Million Verifier better because we don't have to subscribe to it. We can just buy tokens without having to subscribe, but Lead Magic is a monthly subscription. That being said, if you have consistent demand, Lead Magic is probably cheaper than Million Verifier. So we're planning to switch over to that in the future. Second, we're planning to be testing out alternatives to Scrubby. Right now, the big one we're looking at is Bounce Ban. But with that being said, I can't emphasize this enough. Scrubby does work. Scrubby works totally well. It's just that it has, for us, been a little bit hard to use with server uptime, and so we're exploring alternatives, but Scrubby is a great platform. I think Nick Abraham has built something impressive. And last, our make.com build to run all these scenarios is quite expensive, and so we probably would switch over to N8N. N8N is a little bit more technically advanced than make.com, but is still beginner friendly and is still possible to write stuff with low code, no code. So it'll probably be the platform we use in the future instead of Make. Links in the description below for getting access to the spreadsheet shown. And of course, if you want our help running a cold email campaign for you, then hit me up on LinkedIn and we'll see if we can help. And if you found this video helpful, we have a lot more videos coming out about how we set up the Make.com scenarios, greater deep dives into our process, and also how we use Clay to enrich the leads and to write the email copy from them using AI. So if any of that sounds helpful, then be sure to subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next one. Why would you choose Apollo instead of using LinkedIn? Apollo has a lot more filters that really help you narrow down your target market even further. Though I would warn you that if you can get away with using LinkedIn, that you probably should, because LinkedIn has more up-to-date information.